A Father's Promise by Donnalynn Hess. Chapter 19. Christmas Memories, December 1939. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. Luke 12:15b. Several long, cold days had passed. It was Christmas Eve. Rudy sat alone in the forest by the fire, warming himself and thinking on all the Christmases that he had gone before. He saw himself beside a different fire, his father seated next to him. They had had their fill of Christmas dinner and were now settling down to read the Christmas story and open their presents. Rudy recalled his father's strong, mellow voice as he read the scripture. He then remembered the look of pleasure on his father's face as they watched Rudy examine each new gift he opened. He remembered, too, his own feeling of satisfaction when he saw that his father was pleased with the gift Rudy had carefully chosen for him. Such memories tumbled into Rudy's mind one upon another. As they did, he began to realize something about all the Christmas Eves and the mornings he had known. He began to awaken to the fact that all the pleasant memories were not centered in the warmth of fires, in the food or festivities, or even in the presents. They were centered in his father. Even in the forest, he could make a fire, and thanks to Oscar, he could also find a way to eat his fill. As for the presents, Rudy was certain that even if he had had a cartload of gifts, they could not have cheered him. People are important, Rudy, not things. How many times he had heard his father say those words, but only now did he feel that he truly understood. Reaching inside his coat pocket, he pulled out his mother's last unopened letter. He ran his fingers over it carefully. Despite his care, it had become wrinkled and soiled during his traveling in the forest. Perhaps, he thought, I'll go ahead and open it tonight. He reasoned that his birthday seemed so far away, and reading the letter now would be something special he could do, something that would make the night even more like Christmas Eve. He laid the envelope across his knee and gently ran his hands over it to smooth it out. Then, with a decisive air, he turned it over and tore it open. And leaning close to the fire, he unfolded it and began to read. November 15th, 1940. Dear Rudy, in my first letter, I promised you that in latter letters, I would tell you more of what I knew about your father. Since this is probably the last letter I will be writing you, it is time to keep that promise. I'll begin by telling you that I have known few men who are as strong, as wise, or as kind as your father. He possesses qualities that evoke respect from men in any age. Had he lived in another time, he might have been a gallant knight, a noble warrior, or a worthy sage. Of course, there would be those who would discredit my account of him by saying that I see him too much through love's eyes, but I am safe with you, for I imagine that you see him through the same eyes, and to such critics we can say, who would know him better than you and I? I would point out, too, that if a man can earn the love and admiration of his family, he will have little difficulty in securing the respect of his neighbors. Any honest man admits that it is easier to be thought noble in public than it is to be considered consistently so at home. But enough of public opinion. My concern is not with your father's reputation, for I think we both agree on the kind of man he is. My concern is that you know how he came to be such a man. It can be stated simply, he learned early the importance of dying to self and I have watched him die again and again over the years. If you will watch him closely, you will see the same. Don't misunderstand me. It has not always been easy for him. Dying is never easy, despite the hardship. However, he has seldom failed. But how can a man or boy know that he has succeeded in dying to self? You must ask yourself, can I easily forgive someone who's hurt me? Can I cheerfully meet someone else's need, knowing that I will never receive anything in return? Or can I do some good deed or accomplish some hard task and be content that another receives the credit for what I have done? If you can do such things, Rudy, you have begun to die to self, for you have ceased rejoicing in the glory that doing good can bring, and have started rejoicing in the good itself. So I ask you, son, while you are young, to die willingly. Until you do, you will be only a shadow of what you could become. As you know, a shadow only looks like a man. Long ago, your father ceased being a shadow and became a man. But as he is, Rudy, and neither God nor I shall ever have cause to be disappointed in you, love, Mother. As Rudy sat by the fire and thought about his mother and father, he was filled with a longing unlike any he had ever known. It was a longing for the world to be as God intended it, and with the longing came a desire that he should help to make it so. It seemed for the first time that he had begun to see things clearly. Having seen, he felt that he could never again be satisfied with the heroic deeds that took place only in his imagination. Lost in such thought, Rudy failed to feed the fire, and he now realized that it was dwindling. A winter sleet had started. Rather than trying to rekindle the fire, he decided that it would be better for him to head toward one of the villages and find an open barn to sleep in. There he could stay dry and keep a good night's sleep as well. Besides, he felt like walking. After throwing snow on the last embers of the fire, he set out. At dawn the next morning, Rudy was half roused from sleep by a rustling sound. It was faint, so faint that he soon decided he had been only dreaming. He turned on his side, and the strong smell of damp hay reminded him that he was inside someone's barn and that he needed to get up and move on before the day began. Reluctantly, he stood, brushed himself off, and headed toward the ladder at the end of the loft. He had just started his descent when he heard the rustling sound again. He had not been dreaming. He scanned the loft carefully, but it was still very early and difficult to see clearly. He thought of climbing back up and taking a closer look, but decided against it. It seemed wiser to get moving. He made his descent as quickly as possible and headed for the door. But as he did, he turned back and thought he saw the outline of another figure coming down the ladder. He would have bolted out the door, but the form seemed small and unsteady. Deciding he had nothing to fear, he continued to the foot of the ladder and waited. It wasn't long before a little girl stepped down and stood before him. As she stood looking up at him expectantly, he noticed that she held a ragged, stuffed rabbit tightly by the ear. It occurred to him that he had possibly been sleeping in her family's barn. But he quickly dismissed the thought, for he could not imagine any parents sending their little girl out to sleep in the loft. He then remembered Oscar telling him of children who slept in barns and begged food from the villagers, but surely this little girl was too young to succeed at such a life. By her size, he guessed that she could be no more than about 3 or 4. "What are you doing here?" he asked. She said nothing. She simply stood there as if waiting for Rudy to do something. He knelt down to get a better look at her. It was then he realized that he had seen this little girl before. It was the same little girl that he had cared for his first day at the hospital, the same one whose sister had been killed in the field. Although she was paler, thinner than she had been before, she was still a lovely little girl. Her dark hair and large dark eyes made her skin, by contrast, seem that much whiter. Rudy and his father had been forced to leave the hospital before she recovered from her wounds. As a result, they had never discovered whether her mother and her father had been found. Now he hesitated to ask. "Where do you live?" he finally asked. She still said nothing, and he remembered his father saying, "She has not said a word since one of the soldiers brought her here." It occurred to him that maybe she never had said anything, or at least had not spoken since that first day he had met her. He wondered if she even understood what he was saying, and he decided to try one more time. "Do you sleep here every night?" he asked. It was no use. She would not or could not reply. "Well," he said, standing, you're welcome to come along with me, that is, if you don't have anywhere else to go. I can take care of you. I can get us things to eat and make sure that we are warm and dry at night." A faint smile spread across her face. "Come on if you want," he said, moving forward toward the door. We really should get out of here before the farmers wake up. You know they wake up awfully early." Catching up to him, she reached up and took his hand. It seemed so small inside his own. "You know," he said, stopping, "I don't even know your name. And since you don't seem to be able to tell me, I'm going to have to think of something to call you. I mean, I can't go around calling you little girl, can I?" He waited, but she made no gesture or change of expression to indicate whether she objected. "How about if I call you Ingrid? That is what my mother's name. That was my mother's name, and it's a very pretty name, I think. Is that all right with you?" She nodded. Rudy was encouraged. Despite her silence, she definitely understood what he said to her. "Good," he said. "Then it's settled." He pushed the barn door open carefully and looked out. Everything was still quiet. He stepped out, keeping a firm hold on her hand. They had gotten past the farmer's cottage and were heading toward the open field when the little girl stopped abruptly. "What's wrong?" asked Rudy. She had suddenly become frightened. "Come on," he urged. "We really must be going. There's not much time." Still, she would not move. He looked out over the field, trying to see if there was anything to frighten her. There was nothing. The field, he thought, looking down at her. Maybe it's the field that she's afraid of. After all, how can she be sure that there are not German planes waiting for her to step out into the open space again? Still, they had to cross that field. There was no other way into the forest. "How about if I carry you?" he said, testing her. She remained unmovable, looking down at the ground before her. "I promise I won't let anything happen," he assured her. She looked up slowly and studied his face for several moments. At last she reached up and let him take her. And as he set out across the field, he remembered it was Christmas morning.